I spent $3,628 on publishing my romance novel. And the interesting part is that almost half of that was spent on stuff that you don't need to actually publish your book. And some of the things that I spent a lot of dollars on, I would happily spend again. But there are other things that I would be a bit more considerate with going forward. And there is one expense that looks like it costs zero, but it definitely didn't. So today I'm going through every single expense of me publishing a new chapter by the Canal. This means editing, proofreading, cover design, translation tools, formatting, audiobook, and admin, and the very expensive pile of books that is currently sitting in my home. In this video, I'm going to tell you exactly what I spent, what I did myself, and what I would pay again. And most importantly, where I think first-time authors actually could save money without making the book feel cheap. Because I don't think that it's a useful question to ask yourself, how much does self-publishing cost? The thing you should be asking yourself is what is actually worth paying for. And by the end of this video, I'm going to give you 3 different budgets so that you can choose for yourself depending on where you are. One with a minimum viable budget, a professional but sensible budget, and the budget that I would use if I was publishing tomorrow and had the money for it. But first, let's start with what I actually published, okay? Before we go into money, I wanted to give a little bit of a context here, because I didn't just publish a book. I published a special edition book in Swedish, as you can see, very pretty here, an audiobook in Swedish, ebook in Swedish, ebook in English. I'm going to do the paperback in English as well. And yeah, that's it. So it's like multiple books in one here. And this is important because it actually changes the budget enormously. So depending on what kind of book you want to publish, there will be different kind of slots in your budget sheet that you will have to think of. For example, if you're publishing the ebook and doing the print with print on demand, that means that you don't have to put up with any upfront cost, for example. But if you're doing a special edition run like I did, that means that you will have to budget that. And also, pay for storage or have the books at home. And when I tell you that I paid $3,628 to publish a book, don't hear that as you have to spend the same amount to publish your book, because you absolutely don't have to. This is why I wanted to break it down in this video and what I think is value for my money and that I will think an extra time about paying for next time. Remember that my biggest single expense was optional, and we'll get to that. But first, let's start with the part of the budget that I spent most of my money on initially, which is editing. In 2023, I paid for the first major expense when it came to this manuscript, and that was the developmental editor. I spent around $1,000 on developmental editing, and that's a lot of money. But I wanted to do that because I wanted to make sure that this manuscript hit all the beats for the genre that I've written in, because usually I tend to write fantasy and other genres, so I really wanted this to be as good as it possibly could. And if you don't know what a developmental editor is, that is not someone who will check the grammar or commas or your style of writing. This is someone who will go over the beats of the story and will make sure that you hit all the turning points, all the expectations of the genre, and look at the plot a lot and character development. They're looking at the actual story to make sure that the story is as good as it possibly can be. Does the plot work? Does the pacing work? Are the character motivations believable? Do the emotional arcs land? Are there scenes that shouldn't be there? And I think for a romance novel, this is especially important because a lot of people read a lot of romance novels, so we have certain expectations that as a reader that I need to make sure that I hit, or at least be mindful of if I decide not to do that kind of thing. Because in a romance novel, the relationship and the development of the main character is the entire story. And the developmental editing actually gave me something that I've had a hard time giving myself, which is distance from the manuscript. It made it possible for me to see the story from it with an outside perspective. And I mean, I've been working on this book for a lot of years, so I have had it resting for months at an end in between editing rounds, but it still made a huge difference, I think. And now to the big question, was it worth $1,000? Well, for me, I think absolutely, yeah. It's definitely was worth the money at this stage. Would I do it for the next romance novel that I write? I don't know, because now I feel like I know the genre and the beats so good that maybe I don't have to use a developmental editor. We will see when I get around to editing my next romance novel. But since this is something that I want to propel my author career going forward, I want to work on this. I want to have the book as professional as it possibly can be. And that is why I decided to invest money in the developmental editing. And if I were to rank things that you can pay for, I do think that developmental editing is one of the things that I rank the highest, because getting the story as good as it possibly can be is, I mean, that is why we write. That is what the reader wants. If it's a great story, they will forgive us for making a grammar error or whatever it is. But if the story isn't there, then everything else fails. Like, it doesn't matter if I pay a cover designer if the story is really bad. If it's poorly written and doesn't hit the plot points, doesn't hit the beats of the story. But if your budget is tiny, you could get the same kind of feedback through a critique partner, beta readers, writing groups, manuscript swaps, or an editorial assessment. Like, there are different kinds of things that you can pay for depending on what your budget is here. So only just because I think it was worth it for this manuscript, that doesn't mean that you have to pay for it for yours. Just remember that you're exchanging more of your own time and uncertainty for less money. And there is nothing wrong with that. But if I had the budget, I would definitely pay for it again. So next up was the copy editor, and that one cost me around $850. This is a great copy editor that I've used that really helped me lift the manuscript from an okay one to what I think is a great one. But I really needed the copy editing for this one, because writing in present tense, first person, turns out that it's really hard for me to do that. I get caught up using like the same phrases and the same words repeatedly again and again. So a copy editor is super important, just to point out like where I overuse a certain word, for example. So instead of asking like, does the story work, they will ask, does the writing actually work? That means that they'll look at grammar, consistency, sentence level problems, repeated words, odd phrasing, continuity, and style issues. These are little things that doesn't ruin the story initially, but it can make a book feel very unpolished and not finished if you don't have help looking at it. And this is another area where I think a lot of authors underestimate how hard it is to do this by yourself, to be honest. Because at least for me, how my brain works, and I know that this is the same for a lot of my author friends, but when I read my own writing, my brain will fill in the gaps whenever there is a misspelling, whenever I overuse a certain word, because I will be so invested in the story and the plot that I don't really see the finer detail, which is the sentence and the copy editing. When I, for example, do marketing instead, then it's like the copy editing, first of all, it's a lot shorter texts, but then the copy editing, that is what I'm working on, not a big story. So I think it's just a bit harder to refocus and look at the finer details on your own writing, which is why I think that a copy editor is super important. I know that some people get a deal where they have a copy editor that later helps proofread the manuscript as well. So, there are different kinds of copy editors depending on where in your journey you are and depending on what you feel like your need is. And was it worth $850? Yes, absolutely. I think that if I hadn't had the copy editor for this manuscript, it wouldn't have been a good book, to be honest. I feel like I really needed this for this book, and I will definitely pay it again, 100%. My copy edit is $1,850 in total. This is more than half of the core publishing spend before the special print run, and I'm completely okay with that, because I'd rather spend money on improving things that the reader actually consumes than spend the same amount on a beautiful promotional material for a book that isn't ready. And that is probably one of the biggest lessons for the entire process. Spend on the product before you spend on promotion. Professional editing prices can vary a lot depending on what genre you write, what language you write in. Remember that I write my manuscript originally in Swedish before I translate them. So look at the data and see what the prices are where you live and on the market that you're writing. And the amount of money that I spent on editors, that is not a universal number that is like for everyone. Remember that, okay? Next up comes the proofreading, and For me, the proofreading actually didn't cost any money. I have a good friend of mine, another writer, who helps me with the proof edit. That's great. And I help her with marketing sides of being an author. So we do sort of a swap there instead of paying each other, since we're, indie authors. But that is a great way for me to save money. I mean, if I had the money, of course, I would pay for it. I think it's very important to get a polished language and a polished book. But again, prices for Swedish proofreaders are actually, from what I've seen, a lot more expensive than the ones you can get internationally if you're writing in English, for example. So once again, here it depends on where you're writing in and what you need. And would I use this arrangement again? Absolutely yes, if both people genuinely feel like the exchange is fair. But I wouldn't build my entire author business on like swapping services with other writers, because it takes a lot of time also to do the work for someone else. So when it came to my cover, this is a little bit of a complicated one, because here I actually had a special arrangement with the cover designer. This is an up-and-coming cover designer that I know that wanted to do the cover for my book. So I am not going to disclose how much money was exchanged when it came to this beautiful cover of this book. But generally, for a illustrated romance cover, I think that would land somewhere between $500 to $800. You could probably spend a lot more also on a beautiful cover design here. And I think that for a romance novel, or for any genre written novel, to be honest, I think that the cover is super important, because that's one of the biggest marketing advantages that you get from a book. We do judge the book by its cover, whether we want to or not, because we only have like a millisecond when it comes to deciding whether whether we will give a book a chance or not. So having a professional cover that fits in with the genre and current trends that you're writing in, like, that is always something I am going to try and prioritize and try to pay for, because that will help me so much more than an ad campaign possibly could, or any kind of marketing. Like, that is the core marketing thing, I would say, that the cover is. And you can't just choose a beautiful cover. I see new authors doing this sometimes. They will just fall in love with a specific cover or a photo or whatever, and they'll just have it as the cover of their book. It won't fit in with other books in the genre in the physical bookstore or on the Amazon page, whatever it is. And the problem with that is that me as a potential reader would probably discard it because it didn't fit. And I wanted to read a specific genre. I wanted to read romance novel that feels like Emily Henry wrote it, or something like that. Yeah, well, if that's the case, then the cover should someone hint towards that. If it's a completely different cover, then I won't give it a chance, because there are so many other books that I want to read that are on my TBR list as a reader. So we need to remember this and really think this cost through, I think. But that being said, it is also sometimes a big expense. So if you have a limited budget and have to choose between a cover for $600 or a launch campaign using ads for $600, every single time I would choose the cover, because that will give you so much more in the long run. But if you can't pay for a cover right now, then you know what? You have a new chance later on to pay for a cover when you have made a little bit of money with your writing. That's the good thing about this. We own the intellectual properties of our own, the books that we have written, which means that we can relaunch them and change the covers, re-edit them later if we want to. So now we have the translations. And I am an indie author. I don't have a huge budget when it comes to my writing, and I speak Swedish. I do not speak English. So I paid for a DeepL to do the rough translation of the manuscript to English. And then I have a lifetime subscription of Pro Writing Aid. So I used that to go through the manuscript just to make sure that it was US English and it followed the Chicago Manual of Style, which is the kind of English I want to write in. The reason why I can't translate the entire thing line by line is because I lived in New Zealand. I had a roommate from the UK, and I watched a lot of TV from the US. So my English is a mixture of all the different accents which is not good when you're writing. And readers are not as forgiving as you think. If I were to write things that, if I spell some of the words like they do in Australia, people would not be kind in the reviews, I promise you. So that is the process I use. At this point in my career, I cannot afford having a professional human being translating my work. So I'm doing the best with what I've got here. And yeah, I'm being very transparent in the translation as well. I've written on my copyright page the fact that I've used the AI-powered tools for the translations. And I know that some people might judge me for this. Here's the thing, I'm doing the best with what I've got. And a translation from Swedish to English, I think I might be wrong about this, but I think it costs somewhere around $10,000 because it takes a lot of time and it's an art to actually translate something. So yeah, I don't have that much money for translations right now. So I'm doing the best with what I've got here. And also, like, since I am going through everything myself and correcting it and making it the way I want it, that also makes it possible for me to get the tone and the style and the sayings through in the way that I would write it myself, which I think is quite great because a translator wouldn't get the fine print with some of the things. Like in this book, there is a Swedish saying that is in the book, and so when I translated it, the translation wanted it to be like the US version of it, which is something completely different. But I chose to go with the Swedish one. But then the character, the character that hears it is like doesn't understand it because it's a Swedish saying. So you can also play around a little bit with stuff like this. Okay, I'm getting away from the topic, so let's get back to it. But was it worth $8 to translate the book? Yes. I mean, obviously, but it did take a lot of time. I think going through the translations took me around a month and to rewrite it all and go through, make sure that I was happy with the sentences and yeah, the entire manuscript, English version of the manuscript. Next up, we have formatting. And formatting, I did myself, both for the ebook and the print book. I use the program Vellum to do my formatting, both actually for the print and the ebook, which means that I'm paid for a lifetime subscription for that product, which means that each and every, I mean, I create a lot of books. I try to publish 2 books a year, preferably in 2 languages. I'm not sure if I will be able to keep up that pace, but right now that is what I'm doing. And that means that it will be a lot of books. So I chose to pay for that product. This is not sponsored, but I really, really like it. But it also means that I get professionally looking books that are fairly fast to fix, especially if there's some spelling error or something, some mistake that I find. So yeah, highly recommend it if you can. There are also a bunch of other products that you can buy and use to format your own books. So I also recorded the Swedish audiobook for this book, and on the spreadsheet it says it cost $0. And of course, I mean, technically it did because I did everything myself. I recorded it myself. I did the mastering myself, the editing, every single thing. I already have a professional microphone. I remade my walk-in closet to sort of a sound booth, but it took a lot of time to record the audiobook. This is the first time I make an entire audiobook. I mean, I have a professional podcast, I do YouTube, and I have a lot of those things, but I've never recorded an audiobook before. So I don't think I really was prepared for the amount of time it takes. I would say that it might have taken 4 times as long as the final book because first of all, I recorded everything and you say stuff wrong, you want to say it in another intonation, you want to have different voices for different characters. All of these things are stuff that I was learning as I went on and had to fix later. Also, sometimes my stomach were making funny noises. My neighbor started renovating their apartment and it was a lot of stuff going on. So I tried to record 1 to 2 hours a day just to get moving on or to get somewhere with the manuscript. But honestly, it was hard. And like here in Sweden, audio is so huge. Like we consume audiobooks a lot more than we consume ebooks and physical books. So having the book as an audiobook is for this genre, I would say I have to for the Swedish market because that is where the majority of my book sales probably will come from. So I had to have it either way. Either I'd have to pay someone to do it or I'd have to do it myself. And this time I chose to do it myself because it's a manuscript that I've read so much and that I feel so close to that I felt like I wanted to give it a try. And I think that, to be honest, like if you have the equipment and if you have the time and if you want to learn, do it. For at least when it comes to the people who I've talked to a lot of people, like, would you prefer having an AI narrated book or me narrating the book? I've asked them. And almost everyone says that they wanted the author to narrate it because there is still a difference, like with the intonation and how you speak. And also, I can like make the characters come to life a lot more since I already know what they sound like than of course an AI could do. So that is what I did. It costs $0, but it took me a lot of time. So will I do the same thing in the future? I don't know. We will see. We will have to see how the listeners respond to me as a narrator and if it will be worth my while or if I will hire someone if I can afford it with my next book. Okay, now we'll come to the monster. So the special edition print run cost me around $1,700 for 300 books. So that was actually a lot of money. And I wanted to have a special edition here in Sweden because of the fact that I feel like it's easier for me to market a book that is pretty, that is special edition, that people would want to have on their bookshelf. But I mean, I have to storage most of the books at my home because it costs a lot to have it at a warehouse. So that is a little bit of an issue. It's fine though. I mean, it's fine, but it is an issue for next time if I'm going to do it again. But also, if you have print on demand, then you don't have to pay for upfront. I mean, to be honest, like I don't know if the book is going to sell or not. We will have to see. Time will have to tell. So with this cost, I don't know if it's going to be worth it. But I do know that I have at least, I mean, next year I am planning to do another romance novel that will look similar, hopefully. And like I will have a collection of books that will be separate, but still like in the same universe. And I do think that if this one sells, I'm going to continue to do special editions in Sweden for them. But we will have to see. Time will have to tell with that. I am not sure if it was worth it or not. But this is definitely something that you don't have to pay for yourself if you're self-publishing. I would honestly probably go with print on demand, especially if I don't have that many books out yet. So I don't know how much I usually sell when I release a new book. I mean, I have some statistics from Library of Eternity, but more than that, I don't. So I have to be very mindful with my money when it comes to stuff like this. And next up, we have some admin fees. There will always be admin fees when you're doing publishing. Here in Sweden, you have to pay for something called bokinfo, which is some administration thingy if you want physical bookstores and libraries to be able to order your book from the warehouse or from me directly. So that has a fee of $70 per book, which I mean, that's fine. And then there were a lot of other like licenses and stuff I paid for, but those I had paid for in advance. Usually I tend to buy a lifetime license because I know I want to do this long term, so I might as well pay for it upfront instead of having a subscription. But yeah, it is what it is, you have to do it. So that's it. How much did I actually spend if we break it down now? Let's total everything, okay? Developmental editing, $1,000. Copy editing, $850. Translation tools, $8. Special edition print run, $1,700. Admin, $70. Formatting, $0. Audiobook, $0. Proofreading, $0. And I'm not including the particular cover arrangement because it wasn't representative for a standard commercial purchase. So my actual new cash outlay was $3,628. But this is where the number actually becomes a little bit more interesting, because if I take away the order of a special edition, the cash spent comes to around $1,928. And to be honest, I don't think that's too bad. That is quite okay to get a professional book out, to be honest. And I wanted to share this because I don't think that you can say it costs $5,000 to publish a book or it costs $0. That is useless information. You have to think about what you pay for and what you need to make your book as professional as possible. Maybe you are cover designing yourself, then you don't have to pay for that. Or maybe you're really, really good at formatting the book, then you don't have to pay. But you need to think about what you want for successful release at this stage and what you can be without at this point in your author journey. Because we need, think that if we want to be successful in the authors in the long run, we need to think a bit on it like a business. And that is what I'm trying to do with a new chapter by the Canal. So if I publish the book tomorrow, this is exactly what I would spend money on again. So priority number 1 is editing. Developmental editing and proof editing. This is so core for me because I want my stories to be as professional as they possibly can. And with an external person that is a professional of doing this, the book will always become better. So this is always something I'm going to try and prioritize paying for. Number 2 is the cover. I think that a professional cover is more important than a lot of other things. And yeah, that is the face of the product. That is how you sell the book in the long run. So I will always as well try to make sure and pay for the cover, because pay for a professional cover that fits in with the genre. I know it's really hard to find great cover designers as well, but I will always try and do my best with this. Priority number 3 is proofreading. I think that this is such a good hygiene factor to make sure that the manuscript doesn't have that many spelling errors, grammar, things that are wrong grammatically and stuff like that. And you can only go so far yourself with proofreading, because your head will fill in the gaps and correct the wrongs, because that is how we're wired when we know the thing we read. But when we read another person's text, then it's a lot easier to see misspellings and things that are wrong. Priority 4 is admin tools. I mean, these are necessary. They're not fun, but you have to pay for them. I think that the other things are optional for me. The things I would DIY is formatting, definitely. Translation tools, yeah. Marketing assets, absolutely. Audiobook, yeah, I think probably. It was a lot of fun, but it took a lot of time to do it. So we will have to see on that one. What I would be extra careful about is ordering inventory, since, I will have to store the books myself. It takes time fixing with the shipping and stuff like that from my home. So that is something that I will consider for the next time. So let's make this a little bit more useful for you when you're planning to release your book. Here are the 3 budgets with different budget tiers, so that you can choose which one you want to go with, okay? And there are no exact prices here, but more priority. Budget number 1 is the lean DIY author. If money is extremely tight, I would do this. I would use beta readers and critique partners heavily. I would DIY formatting. I would use print on demand. I would skip the audiobook initially. I would not order inventory. I would look for quality pre-made covers or affordable designers, and I would pay for a professional service that solves my manuscript's most biggest weaknesses. Whether that is the copy editing or the developmental editing, you will have to figure out what is most necessary for you. The goal is not to spend nothing, but to spend money where your own skills can't replace a professional expertise. Budget number 2 is professional but sensible. And this is probably where I myself naturally fall. I would pay for professional editing, a professional quality cover, proofreading. I would DIY the formatting. I would use print on demand in most cases. I would make sure I have the basic tools. And I would, consider whether or not I needed an inventory of books myself at home. And budget number 3, my dream budget, is the premium collection here. And now we're talking multiple professional edits, custom cover or illustrations, maybe even math, professional interior design, professional narration, special edition, large print run, advanced marketing assets, maybe sprayed edges, illustrations and stuff like that. And there is nothing wrong with spending that amount of money, but there is also nothing saying that if I spend $7,000 on a beautiful, beautiful book, professionally made book, that I will make more than $7,000. Like, we don't know that yet. So yeah, you would have to think about where you want to invest your time and your money. So one lesson I wish more authors heard out there is you don't have to, there are like 2 extremes. Some say that some say that publishing is free, and some say that publishing is super expensive. You don't have to choose either side here. You just need to understand where you need to make informed choices, I would have to say. And think about each expense like this. Does it make my story better? Does it make my book easier to trust? Does it make the reader experience better? Does it help the right reader discover the book? Or am I buying this to feel more like an author? And the last one might hurt a little bit, but I have seen author friends who will spend a bunch of money on merchandise and bookmarks and stuff like that. And like, but they won't pay for a professional editor. I'm like, but why? Why are you spending money on fluff when you need a great book? Because if you have a great book, then chances are that people will start talking about it organically and they will leave reviews and stuff like that. And that is what we want. We want other readers to love it and to share, and to tell more readers about the book. So let me know in the comments if there's one thing you would be spending money on. What would it be for your book? Is it the editing, the cover, proofreading, narration, or formatting? What is the most important thing for you, do you think? And if you're thinking, okay, but I've spent a lot of money on getting the book as professional as it possibly can be, how do I get reviews for the book? If that is what you're wondering, then I want you to watch how to get your first 25 book reviews before your book launch up next. Because creating a professional book is half the job. The next step is getting it into the hands of the reader. Thank you so much for watching. I will talk to you guys soon.